So basically, this deep acting is a reflection of emotional intelligence, or we can say that deep acting is itself an emotional intelligence. Now, coming toward emotional intelligence, which is the utmost requirement um, for not only for the individual success in the personal life or in the personal relationship, this emotional intelligence is equally important to be successful in individual career goals uh, and even for the organizational competitiveness. So, first of all, to begin with, we are going to discuss the definition of emotional intelligence. And as we can read it here, it is the ability to perceive and express emotion. Not only we are perceiving or expressing the emotion, but at the same time we are assimilating the emotion in the thought. So what emotional intelligence require us as a proactive person is that we need to first of all understand, perceive and understand that what kind of emotional state we are having, and then we need to also assimilate it into our thought process, that whether whatever we are experiencing, why this emotional state is occurring. And when we are trying to assimilate it in our thought, basically what we are doing, we are trying to understand and also giving reason to the emotion that we are experiencing. And when we are able to understand and reason out with our emotions, eventually we are able to properly, not controlling the emotion, but we are able to regulate the emotion in oneself, and not only in oneself but also with other people around us. So this is basically the entire definition of emotional intelligence. And if you can look at this emotions intelligence, it basically talks about different stages in this definition. And if we just want to categorize these stages, there are basically four stages of emotional intelligence, which according to Daniel Goleman, he has stated. And if we look at this these four stages, the first stage, uh, if we want to become an emotional intelligent person, is the self-awareness. So before first of all, before talking or going into this model, we need to understand that why we need emotional intelligence. um, if we talk about today world scenario, nowadays it is not the intellectual quotient that is making you a productive asset for the organization. Rather, it is basically the emotional quotient that is required by the organization, because even having a very high skill set of IQ, if you are not able to emotionally regulate the emotions, your entire emotional process, and you are not able to manage relationship um, at personal level or even at the workplace, you can never become a productive employee for the organization. And similarly, the organization cannot actualize the potential of their employees if they are not emotionally intelligent. So uh, the most, or you can say the utmost prime need of every organization nowadays is basically you can say implementation, uh, or having the awareness of this emotional intelligence. And the more the organization have employees who are emotionally intelligent, the higher the, you can say, the success of the organization will be ensured. um, as Today the most prevalent you can say, issues or epidemics that are we are facing in this global scenario, and even after this, inshallah, when this pandemic is going to be over, the most you can say the most prevalent thing that we might be experiencing, or human race might be experiencing, would be uh, the state of self isolation. And because of this social isolation that we are going through, there are a lot of this negative effect of this social isolation that uh, we as people might be carrying. One of the aspect is frustration, or the anger, or the conflict that we are going to have, and in order to curtail all these issues or manage our relationships socially, as well as our organizations are concerned, we need to be emotionally intelligent. Secondly, in the 2019 World Bank conference, the president of World Bank stated that the utmost, you can say, requirement of by the time 2030, that need to be emphasized upon, is basically to address the issue of mental health, and mental well-being is the most important area that need to be curtailed. So if we want mental well-being of our employees, or the people, or our individual self, we need to implement this emotional intelligence into our life. And now, to begin with this model, it starts from the lowest level, and that is the here we are talking it as a lowest level, but it's the most important or crucial level, or the primary, or primarily the most important or fundamental step toward reaching out toward emotional intelligence, and that is basically the concept of self-awareness. Now, what do you mean by self-awareness? Self-awareness is basically understanding one's own self. Now, how what does it mean by understanding our own self? It means that at a very conscious level, we need to understand that what are our purpose of life, our our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, what are our goals that we have set in our life, what are the emotions that we normally tend to have in particular specific situation that we are experiencing, what are the value system that we are carrying in our life, because values are creating our boundaries, and then what are our motivations behind certain goals. We need to be clear about them. We also need to be clear about our circle of concern, who are the people who are important to us, as we cannot include every person in our circle of concern. So we need to rationally identify that who are the people whom we can trust the most. And we also need to understand that at a conscious level, that who I am, what I am, why I am here for, and in this world, and how I am going to lead my life. If these questions are answered by a person, that person is having self-awareness. Unfortunately, somehow these are, despite very easy and fundamental questions, But if you started to chalk it down or make a list of the points that I have discussed with you as an exercise of self awareness, we'll identify that most of us haven't. And if you want to just write it down, most of us have never done it. And when we are trying to do it, if you just put an effort into chalking it down, you will identify it is a very difficult thing to be identified. But if we are able to identify all these aspects, we are on uh, you can say the first pillar of emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence require us to understand, look inward, look into your own self, and identify what you are, what I am. It surrounds our personality, our attitudes, our emotions, our value system, our motivation, our SWOT, our goals of life, our ultimately our reason of existence. And if we become clear about it, we are on the first step where we will be trying to become proactive in our life. Then no matter what the situation will be, whatever the stimulus will be, we will be very clear that how we are going to respond to a particular situation. So the state of confusion when we are experiencing in our life, when dealing with certain situations and we don't know to whom to consult, it's basically not the right manner. The emotionally intelligent person, what he do is that he basically consult with him or herself. Basically, emotionally intelligent person is self-aware. He knows his answers are not um, requiring validation from even from the circle of concern. By this here it means that circle of concern means all those people who the person is trusting. Even he don't require answers of dealing with particular situation from other people around him. Those dealing of situation, the answer of dealing with any situation in individual life should be from within, coming from within the person himself, and that can only emerge, and that clarity of view will only emerge when the individual is self-aware. So we need to understand one thing, that we need to become emotionally intelligent. Another thing that here that we need to understand is that we are not supposed to control our emotion, because we are talking about emotional intelligence model. So primarily here in self awareness, the most significant point that we need to emphasize, or which Goldman tried to emphasize in this model, is the concept of emotions. What happens when we are in conflict with our internal self and the projected emotions? We are not in the process of self awareness. Somehow we are suppressing the emotion, and while doing it, we are doing a surface acting. And when we are doing a surface acting, it cannot go to a greater time duration. Eventually what will happen, we are going to be collapsed, because we are not true to our own self, we are not internally aligned. So what we need to do here in self management, here controlling does not mean, if we talk about the second step of self management, here controlling does not mean that we are supposed to suppress the emotion. Here what we need to do is to understand the emotion and regulate it. Self management is the self regulation of emotion. So we cannot regulate the emotion uh, properly if we are not able to understand the emotion or address the emotion in a right manner. And the step, if I just go back to the emotional intelligence definition, uh, what we have discussed in emotional intelligence definition, that it is, first of all, it's we need to understand in a particular given situation that what kind of emotion that I am experiencing in a particular situation. And then after experiencing that emotion, I need to understand that why I am experiencing that emotion. I need to reason it out. And when I am able to reason it out and give logic to that emotion that I am experiencing, and your internal self awareness process is going to tell you. Because when you have conducted this self awareness, you will be clear that about all your emotional episodes and emotional states. So what you will be going to do, you will be um, mm, you can say experiencing that kind of emotion, and you are giving logic to that kind of emotion that you are having. And when you are putting that emotion into your thought process and finding out the logic behind that emotion, you are actually channelizing that emotion. And when you are able to channelize that emotion, what is going to happen? Your impulses will be self directed. Your emotions will be, you can say, calculated. Your impulses will be properly regulated. And you will also be able to use your resources, whatever you have in a particular situation, to manage that situation properly, or manage your emotion at the same time properly. So we need to understand, first of all, the first two parts that are basically related to individual level victory in the emotional intelligence. And the first part is basically self awareness, that we need to understand our own internal psychological states, our desires, our needs, our wants, our SWOT, our our emotion episodes, why we become angry, what are the triggering factors that make us happy, what are the triggering factors that are making us sad in a particular situation, what are the triggering factors that make us angry in a particular situation. So we need to be clear about it. Some questions arises here, that those people who, here when I'm talking about not to suppress the emotion, there are some certain question arises into one's mind, that expressing the emotion um, sometime is very dangerous, because again, it can create a chaos. Let's suppose in our cultural construct, or you can say in a civilized society, uh, if we are even having an emotional state of getting angry, we are not supposed to respond with an anger. So what we are going to do? We need to control that emotion? No, it's not like that. It's basically, nobody, no one deny. First thing that we need to understand is that we cannot deny the physiological chemical reaction of emotional state that we are experiencing. Having anger is inevitable thing, because it is physiological part of our physiological process. Expressing of that anger in an uncivilized manner is basically a wrong thing to do. So self management tell us that how we are going to regulate that emotion and channelize that emotion with a responsible in a responsible manner. So here what we are going to do is that we need to practice self management, and self management require the first and foremost aspect, that is to understand that what emotional state I am going through in a particular situation, even if it is an anger. Yes, let's suppose if we put it into action, yes, I'm having the feeling of anger in a particular situation. The first thing that self management require me or ask me is to admit or accept that I'm having that kind of emotional state. The second thing that we need to do after admitting that I'm having that or I'm facing that kind of emotional state is basically the state of giving logical reasoning that why I am experiencing that. Here, what you are going to do, you are buying time. Not only you are buying time to express your emotion, you are also identifying the reason behind why you are feeling certain kind of emotion. So when we are able to find, sometimes what happen when we logically connect ourselves with the emotion that we are experiencing, sometimes we find the underlying reasons. And interesting fact is that those underlying reasons, when we identified, somehow are not related to the external situation. There is a very interesting quotation that I read on regarding the psychological facts. That was whenever we feel or whenever we are in a state of irritation regarding particular situation, we need to understand that there are certain insecurities that we are having in our internal state. Because of that, we are having certain kind of you can say uh, uh, annoying sense of annoying or sense of irritation in a particular situation. So we need to understand our own self. So when we connect with ourself in understanding our emotions, what happened, we find the logical reason behind it. And when we find the logical reason behind it, we identify that it is not the stimulus to whom we are reactive, it is somehow related to our self awareness. Either the state of anger is because there is something that I'm lacking in my self awareness process, or if it is not, then there is no need to be angry in that particular situation, because the individual or the situation that is occurring is not because of me. And if some individual, let's suppose in that situation some individual is blaming you, let's suppose, then you we need to understand that that's the narrative of that person, and it is not the complete reality, because reality is something that is at our self awareness level. So when we are able to identify it, what happens, that we started channelizing our emotions. We started redirecting our emotional state into a logical manner. Another interesting fact here I want to share is that emotions are very powerful source of energies that we are having in our life. They are one of the reason we don't need to regress or suppress them is because um, if we don't utilize these energies, these are basically, you can say, the power drive behind actualizing our goals. that we have designed for our life or we have created for ourselves. So we don't need to waste these energies. What we need to do is that whenever we are having or experiencing certain kind of emotions in our life, we need to channelize them into what we need to transform these energies into our achievement of goals that we have created in our life. If you just study any biographies of very successful people, you will identify very common aspect between all those biographies or autobiographies of the successful people, and that is the motivation that make them successful. And most of the time that motivation was basically the emotional state that they were going through in their life, probably the sense of rejection that receive in their life, and they, in order to deny that sense of rejection, they work all their way to in achievement to prove it that whatever they believe in was right. And that energy that they had was basically the emotional state that they were having in their life. So emotions are not to waste by expressing without logic, and emotions are not there to suppress out, because when we suppress certain such powerful form of energies, what happened that we create uh, mm, psychological injuries into our, not only in our mental states but also in our physiology. There is a strong correlation between in the studies there is a very strong correlation existing between all the muscular you can say problems that people experiences related to the depression or the stress, prolonged stress that they are having. And those prolonged stress or depression state that these people are facing is because they are not, they are regressing their emotion all their life. So we don't need to regress our emotional state, we need to channelize them for our goals, in attainment of our goals. We need, if we positively channelize them, we are going to achieve the self management.